Hello, I'm Ryan, and welcome to my channel, Analyze This Mr. Bond, where I discuss the adventures of James Bond 007 and dig for what lies beneath the surface. And today, we're digging into the news. If you haven't been paying attention, we've had some very big news about the James Bond film series recently. David Heyman and Amy Pascal have been announced as the new producers of the Bond series, taking over from Eon Productions. Eon Productions recently signed over all creative control over the Bond franchise to Amazon MGM, and Amazon MGM have essentially delegated the task of bringing Bond to life to producers David Heyman and Amy Pascal. If those names mean nothing to you, David Heyman is primarily known for his monumental success in bringing the Harry Potter books to the screen and making Harry Potter the true global phenomenon that it is today. And Amy Pascal was previously the head of Sony back when the original Craig films were getting off the ground. So Casino Royale through Spectre, she was working very closely with Eon Productions. By most accounts, had a very good working relationship with Eon Productions, was directly involved in the creative development of those films, and has since gone on to produce a number of things. You know, she's been involved in the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, other projects. You can look at their filmographies on IMDb if you're really curious. But what's even more interesting is the follow-ons from that announcement. Matt Belloni, who was the first one to really officially leak the story that David Heyman and Amy Pascal were in the final rounds of talks to be the producers for the Bond series, has also put out into the ether what he's heard about who they're looking at for director. Apparently, as David Heyman and Amy Pascal have been involved with Amazon in these talks to take over the series, at the center of those talks is a pitch for Bond 26 by director Alfonso Cuarón. Alfonso Cuarón, you may know from the film Children of Men, Gravity, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. There have been a number of news stories over the past few weeks saying that if David Heyman was to become producer of the Bond series, Alfonso Cuarón was his favorite. Matt Belloni is the first to start putting out the details there that this is a real thing, that there is a real pitch alive at Amazon, and furthermore, that the movie is further along than we might think. Matt Belloni is a pretty reliable source. Now, obviously, nothing is concrete until the ink is dry. We've had directors actually start work on Bond films, get to the point where sets are being made before they leave the production over creative differences. So nothing is set in stone, but there's a fairly good chance that this is a where there's smoke, there's fire situation. And Matt Belloni is credible, and he's already been right about David Heyman and Amy Pascal. So money is on Alfonso Cuarón being the shepherd of Bond 26. And all of this starts to paint a very interesting picture. So what are our takeaways here? First, Amazon is moving decisively. This is a level of momentum that took everyone by surprise. By all accounts, the Amazon Eon Productions transfer was not really due to settle for another few months. We weren't expecting this rush of official announcements, but that deal closed in what seems to be record time, and now we have a new set of producers announced. That sends a signal that Amazon is looking to get things going. They don't want to wait. The Sun, which is not a reliable source at all, and there was nothing in this article to substantiate what they reported, suggested that Amazon is looking at a 2027 release date. I think that's just common sense based on what we're seeing right now. It feels like the momentum is there for 2027, and Amazon does not want to wait. They want to get producers in place. They want to get a director in place. They want to get this film moving. So that's takeaway one. Amazon is moving decisively. Takeaway two is that Amazon wants to establish some credibility. They have turned to industry veterans, one who is directly responsible for one of the biggest franchise properties in the world, who took an iconic British literary character to the international stage and turned it into a global multi-million-dollar phenomenon, and has also brought on board one of the primary creative partners of the Daniel Craig Bond films. That signals that Amazon is looking to go big. They're taking Bond seriously and they're seeing a lot of potential here, but also that they're looking to establish some continuity with the way Eon Productions was running the Bond films. Amy Pascal coming on board suggests that Amazon is really looking back to the heights of the Craig era, primarily, Skyfall, which made buckets of money. Skyfall was the most successful Bond film since the Roger Moore years. Is really looking back to that era for success here. And the reports are Amy Pascal is going to be the more directly involved producing member. David Heyman is going to be involved, but Amy is going to be more directly involved in the day-to-day. So it appears that the intent is really to have some level of continuity between what the Craig era was and what this next era of Bond is going to be. And you certainly see that if Alfonso Cuarón is indeed the director. If Alfonso Cuarón is indeed the director, he is a very Eon Productions style choice. In fact, we know Eon Productions had casual conversations with Alfonso Cuarón about doing a Bond film in the past. That didn't work out, but now it appears the tide has turned and he is interested in reinventing Bond as part of this big transition. That already suggests they're kind of keeping the Eon Productions model in play, at least the model that formed during the Daniel Craig era, that these high-profile directors would come in and establish a vision for the movie, and that would be the new template. That was a model of Bond film production that organically took effect as Michael G. Wilson stepped back in his duties. Michael G. Wilson had always been the story development leader for the Bond films in his production with Barbara Broccoli. In the past few Bond films, you started to see directors really take the lead there. Spectre really began with Sam Mendes and John Logan locking in a vision for the movie, and No Time to Die was originally the Danny Boyle vision, and then Cary Fukunaga came in to kind of bring together all these different ideas that existed there and tie them into a coherent story that he would feel comfortable directing and bringing to the screen. We're now at the point where it seems that it's going to be the Alfonso Cuarón show, or whichever high-profile director is being brought on board. The quote-unquote auteur director model is here. And so takeaway 3 is then that what we're looking at in Bond 26 is less of a radical pivot and more of a transition. What we're looking at with Bond 26 may be more of a GoldenEye moment, which is to say that GoldenEye as a film could have worked as an end cap to the Dalton era as much as it functioned as the start of the Pierce Brosnan run. So that kind of transitional bridge, a film that kind of sits in the middle tier, it kind of carries over pieces from the prior era and sets up what's to come. Another good example might be the recent The Batman film with Robert Pattinson, directed by Matt Reeves, that definitely did its own thing, but was very much in the mold of this sort of grounded, stripped back, gritty take on Batman and his world that really was established in the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy. Those films are obviously disconnected in continuity, but they share a certain through line. And I think that's what we're moving towards in Bond 26. It's not going to be some radical shift from what the Bond movies have been doing. And indeed, the Bond movies have been pretty successful thus far. So the mode seems to be to kind of apply a similar formula for whatever Bond 26 will be. And of course, if Alfonso Cuarón does end up directing it, he'll go his own way with the material, and whichever actor is brought in will have his own personality, and we'll continue to see that evolve over the next few movies. But I would expect certain key elements to remain in play, and you can start to imagine what those are. I wouldn't expect this to be a big pivot to the cartoonish fun adventures of, say, Roger Moore or some of the sillier Pierce Brosnan movies, at least not out of the gate. With a director like Alfonso Cuarón in the conversation, it does lend itself to this more grounded, potentially dramatic take on the role. So the next takeaway here is that the director, assuming it's Alfonso Cuarón, is going to be in charge of shepherding casting. The sequence in which Bond films are decided is you lock in the producers, you lock in a director, and then you lock in an actor. And so the question is, who would Alfonso Cuarón cast as James Bond? One of the big favorites here is obviously Henry Cavill, and Henry Cavill has been in discussion since he auditioned for Casino Royale way back when. He's obviously grown a great deal. He has a relationship with Amazon. Yes, he's in his 40s, but if Amazon is looking to move as aggressively on these movies as it looks like they are, you could easily get a good set of movies out of someone like Henry Cavill. There's no blocker to him being cast. I think the bigger question is whether he really fits in with the sensibility that is going to be set by David Heyman, Amy Pascal, and the director, who in this case appears to be Alfonso Cuarón. My gut says that Henry Cavill is not the default Alfonso Cuarón take. If you go back, Alfonso Cuarón had a relationship with Clive Owen, who was a long-rumored contender for the Bond role for a while. Someone in that mold feels like what he would naturally gravitate towards for me. Of course, I can be surprised. His Harry Potter film, which I think is the best of the Harry Potter films, has some colorful moments, has some light touches, so it's not necessarily a given that he is going to go for a very serious dark Bond, but I would assume that is fairly likely given Cuarón's past filmography and his approach to storytelling. If that's the case, that raises some interesting questions about who the candidates may be. That's all a lot, and I look forward to talking with you all about the speculations that might spring from those in the comments, because I'm going to save a lot of my more speculative thoughts for future videos, because I think once the next set of news comes out, and I think we're at the start of the avalanche, I think we've just heard the first crackle of the snow, and pretty soon it's all going to start sliding aggressively down the hill. I don't want to get too ahead of the news in my speculations. But I do want to wrap this video up with some talk about fan favorite Christopher Nolan. I believe he was a very serious contender for the role. I've heard that both from public news and off the record, stories told by trusted friends. If he is no longer in contention here, and it seems like he's not, it seems like Alfonso Cuarón is the guy, it's probably just due to Amazon wanting an aggressive timeline. Christopher Nolan is tied up with The Odyssey right now, and he's going to be continuing to work on The Odyssey through at least the end of the year, and then you have the release year with all the promotion involved in that. The likelihood of there being a Christopher Nolan Bond movie that he could comfortably commit himself to in the time frame that Amazon is looking for is not high. It would have been probably a 2028 release at the earliest. So it would make sense that Amazon would be looking to directors like Alfonso Cuarón, who have essentially clear slates. There's nothing Cuarón is connected to right now that would prevent him from just diving headfirst into shepherding the next Bond movie. So that may be why Christopher Nolan one of the more popular rumored candidates, where there was a lot of speculation that now that Amazon was back in the game, that he might be brought back into play. That may be why he's not really in the conversation at this point, just because he's so bound up with his current film, The Odyssey. I know many of you are probably disappointed at the fact that Christopher Nolan might not be doing the next Bond movie. So many of you, both here in the comments and especially over on Instagram, seem to be so passionate about the idea of Christopher Nolan stepping up to the plate and rebooting Bond. And I think that would have been an exciting notion, though it would have also kind of continued in the mode of the Daniel Craig years, much as an Alfonso Cuarón Bond film seems to do. Christopher Nolan is a fairly grounded, dark director, and the Daniel Craig era had already pulled a lot of influence from the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy. In any case, it seemed like the major contenders that Amazon might have been talking to in this time were going to effectively continue what we might call the Daniel Craig era mode. And I know that's probably a blow to those of you who were really hoping for a pivot back to a more colorful, light-hearted Bond. In fact, I'll be honest, I'll lay some cards on the table. I was hoping for a pivot back to a little bit more light-hearted, effervescent Bond adventure, but it does seem likely that we should brace ourselves for a little bit more of a dramatic edge in the Bond films that are going to come our way, at least in the very immediate future. So, thank you for watching this video. I look forward to talking with you all. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one.